you have this little intuition and you have these moments of intuition of where your joy is. Let your body and your soul go where it wants to go. And in the process, you learn to recognize your own depth. Joseph Campbell says, follow that, grab a hold of that bliss and follow it.
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Kulian.
Welcome back, friend. Today we are talking about the book, The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. It's an interview that happened in the 1980s between Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers. And it is one of my probably my favorite book that I've ever read. And I like to listen to it on audio because you can actually hear the exchange and the conversation. And you can hear the passion in the voice of Joseph Campbell as he talks about these topics that he spent his entire life studying. And Joseph Campbell was in his 80s when the interviews took place. And so just this rich depth of knowledge and just he has such a beautiful spirit that is so invested in these truths and in sharing these truths that he's found with everyone. And so he's an exciting teacher, and it's one of my favorite self-development books. And you might think to yourself, what is a book about myths and mythology? How is that going to help me on my self-development journey? How is that going to help me connect deeper with the radiance and, the inborn talent and the potentialities inside of me for greatness and for happiness? And you're going to find as we go through, I've got my 5 top takeaways from Power of Myth, which even as I just say that I have 5 top takeaways, I feel like there's so much more to it than the 5, but we only have 20 minutes together, and I want to respect the time frame of the show, and so I'm going to distill it down to the top 5. But you're going to see throughout this 20 minutes really how powerful these concepts are that Joseph Campbell is just so passionate to teach us, and how this book, The Power of Myth, has probably been one of the most influential self-development books that I've ever experienced. And on the topic of self-development books, how do we develop our potential? This show is dedicated to giving you 20 minutes a week where you think about your potential and you connect with your radiance and you plan for your growth, what you are becoming. But generally speaking, we read self-development books. And throughout my journey of the past 20 years when I've been very intentional about my growth, books from great teachers and passionate, radiant humans have been the vehicle to get me to the next level of myself, and they continue to. And so what I want to do every once in a while on the show is to take one of these books that have shaped me and have really changed my life and pull out my top 5 takeaways and share them with you in the hopes that it will inspire you to dig deeper with these books, to get out more nuggets, and to take your development journey to the next level. And so starting with this Power of Myth, anyone in my life who knows me and has conversations with me over the past 5 years knows how obsessed I am with this book, The Power of Myth, and how much it's really changed me. I almost feel weird sharing this, and I do share it often with people, but I will listen to Power of Myth 4 to 5 times a year, and you multiply that by, I first started listening to it in 2018, so we're going on 5 years where I've listened to this book so many times, and I keep coming back to it because it is so dense with information and nuggets that help me to live a more meaningful, more centered, and more purposeful life. I heard of this book. Bedros and I were having dinner with Tom and Lisa Bilyeu. And if you guys know Tom, he has his podcast, Impact Theories. He's a great, great thinker, and he started Quest Nutrition. And just in passing, we were talking, we both grew up in the state of Washington, and we were having a conversation around, childhoods where there was religion, and he dropped the name of this book, and he said it with like a twinkle in his eye, like this is something interesting. And I took note of it because I'm like, oh, I love to read. This is great. It helped him. I really respect him. I'm going to read this book. And a couple months later, actually on a flight to Rome, I downloaded the book and I started listening to it. And if you listen to the book, you're actually hearing Joseph Campbell speak to you, and he's having this conversation with Bill Moyers. And the only word I can use is magic. There's magic in his voice, and he's so taken with this subject, and he's so passionate about the delivery. And he was a professor for 38 years, so he's very well spoken. But the radiance comes through. And so I keep going back to it time and time and time again. And so here we go, friends. Let's go through what are my top 5 takeaways from The Power of Myth, hoping to do Joseph Campbell justice. Okay, so the first takeaway is transformation of consciousness through mythological stories. So what does that even mean? When I think of our consciousness, Joseph Campbell says that all of life is a meditation. It's just a matter of what do you choose to meditate about? What do you choose to focus on? And so I picture my consciousness before I started opening my mind to these concepts from mythology and religion. And I picture like my view, my consciousness being like looking through this little window, almost like a ground floor window. And when you start to really play around with these stories that are rich with meaning, and they're touching on topics that are fundamental to human existence. They're things that we don't really have words for, so we create a story, we create a metaphor, and this imagery around it. And I picture, my little ground floor window where I can sort of see the sidewalk and I can see people's feet walking by, and this is my view of the world and myself. And then there's a ladder next to me. And by focusing on these deeper issues, it's like going a few rungs up the ladder, and now you're looking out of another window that's a little higher up, and you can see a little bit more of the picture, and you can take in a little bit more, and your perspective changes. And I'm sure you've had this experience when you have a change in perspective and your lens widens up. You're like, oh, I understand this at a deeper level because I see more of what's happening. And so this first takeaway is just even, taking the time to listen to stories of mythology and religion. It's intentionally trying to see more of the picture. And so we're raising our consciousness by focusing on things that have deeper meaning and higher significance. And so all of these stories are telling us one thing, which is that there's this invisible plane that's behind and supporting our visible world. So essentially, we instinctively know that there's energies, right? And we know that there are things that we can't see, but that are real. You might think of karma, or there's different energies. And so all of mythology and all of these stories are trying to address these things that we cannot see. And in previous episodes, I've talked to you about my dragon and how, putting a metaphor behind the inner critic helps me to identify with it more, helps me to differentiate from it. And so all of these stories do that with us on a larger scale about life, about how to live a human life and how to go with, the inevitables of life. And so myths address that edge, the interface between what is known and what can't be known. And as Joseph Campbell says, can never be discovered because it's a mystery that's beyond the realm of human research. And so one of the reasons I keep coming back to his work and his teaching is that there's such a depth of mystery and magic to it and there's so much meaning packed into every story and every word that every time you come back, it's like you're inching up like one more rung on that ladder, and you're seeing a little bit more, and you're understanding that little bit of a deeper level. And so for me, it's exciting. And I know for anyone who opens their mind to it, you'll find the excitement in it. Okay, my second big takeaway from The Power of Myth was the realization of both our identity with eternity and our participation in time. And this is such a tough subject, I think, for us today, as we've really lost our roots with these stories. And in primitive times, stories were passed down generation to generation to help us understand these concepts like we live in the field of time. We are born, we age, and we die. And this isn't inevitable, but we know that part of us resonates with the eternal. And in my opinion, it's our radiance. And these stories talk about that. And so we can see the divine presence, the radiance in the world around us when we raise our consciousness to this level where we're thinking about these things. We're coming out of just the concerns of our human animal and our day-to-day and our survival instincts. And we're thinking about these bigger concepts of, experiencing eternity right now. And so Joseph Campbell says, and this concept of eternity, where we kind of think of eternity as everlasting. And he says, eternity is not future or past. Eternity is a dimension of now. If you think about that, you can see why I have to keep coming back to it to really understand that eternity is a dimension of now. It's a dimension of your human spirit, which is eternal. And so to me, that radiance that's glowing inside of you is eternal. And so one of our tasks as humans, as we evolve and become this higher version of ourselves with higher consciousness, is to find the eternal dimension of ourselves. And when we do that, Joseph says we ride through time and throughout the whole length of our days. And so if you can identify with finding that radiance in you that never dies, how that shifts your perspective on life and death. These are deep concepts, and I don't expect all of this to really sink in 20 minutes. This is why I've spent hundreds of hours on the subject. I'm just trying to get your interest. I want you to be curious with this. That's my hope. Okay, and I know I'm racing through these. The third big takeaway from Power of Myth was that every mythology and every religion is true in the sense that it's metaphorical of a human and cosmic mystery. And so we think of religions and myths, they rise out of a specific time with a specific people in mind, but what they're trying to do is speak to something that's a mystery and to help those people of that time understand that interface between what is our physical reality around us, and then what is that energy plane behind the physical reality that drives a lot of our life, but that we really can't know all the way. And so this idea of finding that metaphorical truth in all of these great teachings. And Joseph Campbell, when you listen to him, he just has this passion, and he knows all of these things, like the level of in-depth knowledge about the most obscure cultures and thoughts and all these things throughout history. Like, he just rapid fires, and it's so cool. But what he says is like, hey, connect with the mystery. Stories of mythology and religion are there to help us connect with the mystery that we come from. And when we can do that, we talk about ourselves as a system. When we can put our system in accord with the system of the universe, now that's somebody who's thriving. And so putting our mind in this place where we're thinking about these things, it's incredible. Okay, the fourth thing is identifying with your consciousness and not the body of which your consciousness is just a vehicle. And so this is the biggest concept for me that I keep returning to. It's so easy to just think of ourselves in physical terms. And this is part of why I talk about the system as these three circuits, but that the physical body circuit, it's right here, right? Like when we interact with others, that's a barrier. That's what we see is their physical body when we look in the mirror. And so it's very easy to feel like the physical body is you. And this concept that all of these great teachings are trying to help us do is to identify with what's not visible, to identify with your spirit. And again, this visual of our radiance, like that little piece of creativity and radiance and that eternal aspect of your spirit, identifying with that. And that piece of you never dies. That piece of you lives on. And so when we can do that, we can understand that we're in the field of time and that our physical body ages. You know, as much as we hate aging these days and we want to be young forever and we want to look younger than we are, it's in a sense, we're kind of trying to deny the inevitable. No human has ever escaped the cycle of life, the womb and the tomb. We get here, we grow, we experience, and then we die. But because there's a piece of us that does have this eternal part of it, this radiance that doesn't die, that continues on and was here before we were, finding a way to make that your identity. And then the rest of it just falls into place. And you can see, you can let your body go. So that's such a cool concept. Definitely something that takes time to think about it, to really let it sink in and make it accessible. And when you do, one of the big fears that a lot of people have is death. Like, it's scary to, what's that going to be like? You know, I remember, especially when I was younger, when I would think of death, just actually physically feeling the fear in my body. And when you can get to this place where you're identifying with that radiance, that's who you are. That doesn't die, that lives on. This body's a vehicle. This body's a vehicle that's giving us this amazing experience that we can make this experience into whatever we want. And so that concept of identifying with consciousness, identifying with radiance, and not identifying with the physical body as the final form of who we are. Okay, the final one, and this is what Joseph Campbell is most famous for. You've been waiting for this, if you've heard of him, is Follow Your Bliss. And he would always say, you know, he was a teacher and he would meet with his students every 2 weeks and check in with them on how they're doing. And he loved the moment when they would just light up with a specific subject or a specific, like when we talk about purpose being this motion, this momentum, and it gets sparked. We don't know when it's going to get sparked, but when it gets sparked on something, he would say, follow that bliss, follow your bliss. Whatever's giving you that rapture of being alive, that feeling of like excitement, like follow that, like chase that. And that's going to be the secret to really having a fulfilling life. And so when you follow that feeling of bliss, my concept of it is when we're beaming our radiance, when we're accessing that radiance, and we're acting out of our radiance, the experience to us is bliss. We think of bliss as feeling good and feeling in full form, right? And so accessing that radiance and just following it where it takes you, because it's not a stagnant process. It's a moving target, and it's a ride. It's an adventure. And so Joseph Campbell says that it's important to set aside a time and a place in your daily life to focus on bringing forth what you are. And in my opinion, he was referring to like bringing forth your radiance, accessing that radiance, and going with it. And so you get this deep feeling of being informed. So you have this little intuition, and you have these moments of intuition of where your joy is. And Joseph Campbell says, follow that, grab a hold of that bliss and follow it. Let your body and your soul go where it wants to go. And in the process, you learn to recognize your own depth. And that's something that I hope to instill in you with this program is the deep belief. Like, I don't just say you have radiance at your center because it sounds nice. Like, I truly believe you have radiance, and that following that radiance and accessing that radiance for the world, it's your duty, and that's your self-development journey. And so I'm going to end with a quote from Joseph Campbell. And he says, I don't think the meaning of life is what we're seeking. I think it's the experience of being alive, so that our life experience on the purely physical plane will have resonance with our innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. Friends, I think that's a beautiful quote to end on from Joseph Campbell, my favorite teacher of all time. So extra credit of the week, download The Power of Myth onto your smartphone. Listen to it when you go on a hike or you go to the gym. Listen to those words and see if it sparks your imagination. See if it helps you raise your consciousness to the next level and really helps you to feel more in tune with the system of the universe of which we are a part of. So friends, I hope you enjoyed this message. Please share this if you think it's cool and somebody in your life could use it. Like and subscribe, and I will be back next week with more fun stuff.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Kulian.